I am currently 27 years old and grew up as the eldest daughter in a middle-class family. My parents have always valued family bonds and traditional values, running a homey restaurant for over 20 years. We lived in a quiet suburban area, and our home mortgage was fully paid off. Although we were not wealthy, my parents demonstrated diligence and devotion to family as their most important teachings. Until recently, I believed I could always rely on my family. However, 5 years ago, after my grandfather passed away, the situation changed. He left me a trust fund. While not a vast sum, it is substantial enough to significantly alter my life if wisely managed. The fund is restricted, only accessible after my grandfather's death. Being practical, I do not plan to use this money unless for significant purposes like buying my first home or furthering my education. I plan to patiently wait until the day comes when I can buy a small apartment in the city or start my own business. This prospect fills me with great anticipation. This trust fund is a comforting assurance and a chance to build something on my own. My 25-year-old brother, Tony, recently got engaged to 26-year-old Jane. Jane grew up in a wealthy family. She is a confident and charismatic woman who lights up any room she enters. However, I've noticed she tends to overstep boundaries concerning privacy and rules. People's reactions to her are polarized. They either adore her or interact cautiously. I had cautiously but positively accepted her becoming a member of the family. However, a few months ago at a dinner, Jane spoke about my inheritance in a refined and cheerful tone, which started to make me feel uneasy. She said, "You are really lucky to have received such a wonderful thing while showing interest in what I plan to do with the money." I explained my ideas about buying an apartment or starting a business, but felt uncomfortable discussing my financial plans in detail, so I kept my answers vague. Jane smiled and jokingly said, "It would be lovely if you could help with Tony and my wedding with that money," adding, "or it could help with our future plans." Tony laughed it off, but Jane gave me a look that seemed to await my agreement, creating an awkward moment. My silence prompted my parents to intervene, stating clearly, "That is our daughter's money." I was unsure if my approach was right, but Jane continued to argue that family money should be used for the whole family. I pretended not to mind, but her words made me uncomfortable. Over time, Jane's comments became more direct, and she would quietly talk to me at family gatherings. At one such gathering, she suggested reconsidering how to use the trust fund, proposing it be used to buy an ideal home with Tony, which would be much more meaningful. I politely declined, explaining the fund's special conditions and my own plans. It seemed Jane did not grasp my intentions. Tony later apologized for her behavior several times but gradually began to say, "I understand Jane's feelings. You could help realize her dreams." Their attitude wasn't overtly pressuring, but it filled me with anxiety. My parents' response when I discussed this with them was unexpectedly ambivalent. They did not outright deny it, but seemed uncertain. My mother said, "Jane just wants to be accepted as part of the family," and added, "Tony has always struggled financially." At that moment, I realized this issue wouldn't be easily resolved. The turning point was when Jane confronted me alone at lunch, seriously requesting a portion of the trust fund as a wedding gift. When I clearly refused, she accused me of being selfish, holding on to money that could significantly change Tony's future. I was stunned and unsure how to respond. Later, Tony called to apologize, but his words felt more like an attempt to smooth things over than genuine remorse. He defended Jane, saying her words might have sounded harsh, but she has a point. I couldn't see an end to this issue and felt increasingly anxious, especially as my parents suddenly seemed sympathetic to Jane's views. It was unclear whether they were simply striving to maintain family peace or genuinely agreed with her. Either way, I felt like I was being made the villain within the family. Lately, I've become more sensitive to trivial matters. Relatives now frequently comment on how fortunate I am. Additionally, I've sensed a subtle shift in Tony and Jane's behavior, as if they are testing my limits. While maintaining composure, I am trying to defend my position, but I can't shake the feeling that I need to be prepared for an unexpected conflict. Honestly, I'm not sure how much longer I can avoid addressing this issue. Several weeks after the uncomfortable exchange with Jane, Tony invited me to lunch. It seemed like an opportunity for light-hearted sibling conversation, and perhaps a chance to clear up any misunderstandings. When I arrived at the restaurant, Tony and Jane were already seated. The conversation started with typical topics like work and wedding preparations, and we shared laughs about how tired we were. However, as dessert arrived, the atmosphere shifted. Jane leaned in and, as if she had prepared for it, started talking about my trust fund in a gentle tone. This time she brought it up directly, suggesting I give part of the money as a wedding gift. It felt more like a demand than a suggestion. She argued that it would be important for the family and would show my support for Tony's future. I calmly reiterated that the trust fund had specific conditions and that I had personal plans for the money. I thought I had made myself clear, but Jane persisted, emphasizing how the money could help everyone and how I didn't need it immediately. While Tony said he understood my position, he also argued that Jane had a point, and dismissing it outright was unreasonable. The conversation left me feeling trapped, and I returned home feeling as if I had been set up. A few days later, my parents called for a family meeting. When I arrived, Tony and Jane were already sitting with my parents. To my surprise, my parents suggested dividing the inheritance to avoid pointless disputes. My father mentioned that family unity was paramount, and this might be a way to demonstrate support. Although they didn't make a direct demand, the pressure was unmistakable, and Jane seemed triumphant. I told my parents that the trust fund was mine and I had clear plans for it, but instead of supporting me, they began to defend Tony and Jane's position. My mother mentioned that Tony had always been financially struggling and that Jane just wanted to be accepted as part of the family. The shock of their attitude was overwhelming, and I left the meeting unresolved, feeling nothing had been settled. The following days felt like a storm. Jane had somehow involved the relatives in the issue. Aunts, uncles, and even distant relatives began contacting me, saying I should act correctly and support Tony and Jane. I realized I had been manipulated by Jane. She framed me as greedy and unwilling to support the family, arguing that my lack of immediate need for the money or its intended purpose for specific goals were not valid reasons to refuse. I confided everything to my best friend, who reassured me that I was not in the wrong, but the calls from relatives continued unabated. A close cousin tried to mediate, but Jane quickly dismissed her, accusing her of interfering unnecessarily. Things worsened when I received a call from Tony one late night. He tried to make me feel guilty with a desperation I had never heard before, and Jane added that the money would allow her to be accepted as part of the family and show how much I cared about them. I refused again, but the conversation left me physically and mentally exhausted. At that point, I consulted a lawyer about the trust fund to confirm that it was legally untouchable by anyone else. The lawyer assured me there were no issues but advised me to keep a record of everything in case the situation escalated. Although relieved by this confirmation, my parents hinted that if I didn't compromise, our relationship might change. It wasn't a direct threat, but the intent was clear. They had chosen money over family. It didn't matter that Jane was the instigator. I felt cornered, and any action I took seemed to only worsen the situation. Jane continued to portray herself and Tony as victims, sharing her narrative with everyone. The situation was completely out of control, and I feared it would only get worse. Then, I learned shocking news. A friend told me that Jane had already paid a substantial deposit for a lavish wedding. She had booked a luxurious venue, arranged expensive catering, and even completed fittings for a designer dress. It was surprising because she was spending as if she already had ample funds. That moment, I realized Jane was expecting me to relent. A few days later, at a family gathering, I calmly confronted her. Jane admitted that she thought I would eventually agree and confessed that she needed to make quick decisions to secure the best vendors. She expressed that she was advancing this year's family event, as if she were bestowing a favor upon me. When I pointed out that this was quite presumptuous, Tony intervened, defending Jane. He explained that Jane was under pressure from the wedding preparations and did not intend to overstep her bounds. Nor did she think she had gone too far. Instead, he believed all her actions were well-intended. Subsequently, many relatives, with whom I hadn't communicated for years, started sending messages to my inbox one after another. Many argued that I should make the right choice and support Tony and Jane. Others accused me of destroying family bonds over a financial issue, calling me cold-hearted. Amidst this, I decided to seek legal advice. The lawyer recommended withdrawing from the financial disputes within the family and maintaining both legal and emotional distance. It seemed like a bold decision. My parents sided with Tony, calling me stubborn and criticizing my unwillingness to compromise. Apart from a few level-headed individuals, it felt like almost everyone else was condemning my actions. Then, the most shocking fact came to light. A cousin informed me that Jane had been probing into my financial situation. She had asked Tony about the details of the trust and had attempted to access my financial records through him, ostensibly to solve a family budget issue. Jane completely denied this, claiming that the cousin was trying to sabotage her relationship with the family. As a result, the family began to split into two opposing groups. Some believed Jane's side and criticized me as selfish and greedy, while others who listened to my explanations began to understand the bigger picture. This division worsened the family's turmoil, turning gatherings into scenes of hushed arguments and sarcastically charged exchanges. I felt an intense inability to endure such situations any longer. The bonds within the family began to crumble, and the person who caused the issue seemed to have no intention of resolving it. All I could do was hope that the situation would somehow move in a better direction, no matter what happened next. After weeks of relentless chaos, I finally decided to take concrete action. The lawyer prepared to send Jane a formal warning to cease her harassment and defamatory acts immediately. Given her increasingly radical behavior, I felt it could not be ignored any longer. The threats themselves were superficial, and the lawyer explained that there was no legal basis for a lawsuit, but I was taken aback by her audacity. Tony, usually mild-mannered, had been completely drawn into Jane's schemes, and my parents intervened again. They urged me to find a peaceful solution to avoid further tarnishing the family's reputation. Their primary concern was not about right or wrong, but how the dispute would be perceived by others. They strongly urged me to make concessions. Their criticism escalated, and a barrage of comments and questions directed at me followed. As a result, I decided to cut off all communication with Jane and Tony and completely sever our relationship. During this difficult situation, my cousin became a significant support for me. She also said she would help gather evidence for self-defense if the problem became more serious. We meticulously reviewed screenshots of posts and messages sent by Jane, along with recordings of conversations from family gatherings. Collecting evidence of her defamatory acts was surprisingly easy. It was infuriating that she tried to affect my reputation at work, but I remained undeterred. Amidst this, Tony made a significant mistake in a group chat with my parents and Jane. He accidentally sent a screenshot of a private conversation with Jane to a public forum. In it, a message clearly revealed her true intentions. She explicitly stated her goals were for profit, and she candidly spoke about expecting my parents to eventually follow her plans. This message spread, and relatives' responses changed dramatically, with many more supporting my position than before. Even those who had been neutral or believed Jane's side began to change their stance. This shift was astonishing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt I was not completely isolated in this conflict. As expected, Jane tried to amend her actions. Realizing that her behavior would no longer be tolerated, she sent insincere apologies. The effectiveness of the restraining order became apparent almost immediately. Jane's posts on social media stopped abruptly, and Tony seemed to gradually distance himself. Although tensions with my parents persisted, Jane's silence allowed me to experience a relief I hadn't felt in a long time. I was finally able to focus on my own life and enjoy some peace. Through common friends and relatives, I reached out to my other brother, Greg. He told me that my options were limited to either maintaining a relationship with the family in name only or continuing the fight against them. It was clear that he was heavily influenced by Jane, but hearing such words from my brother made me reflect. For the first time, I confronted my parents directly about Jane's manipulations, Tony's pressure, and the entire series of events. However, they continued to defend Tony and Jane's positions and showed an unwillingness to face the real issues, prompting me to clearly criticize their stance. Yet, they didn't seem to be deeply hurt by it. During these tough times, my cousin, who had been my greatest ally, advised me that it might be time to cut off contact with my family, even if just temporarily. She reminded me that I shouldn't sacrifice myself to help others, especially when they are not willing to meet me halfway. After much consideration, I decided to distance myself completely from family gatherings. It wasn't an easy choice, but the constant tension was negatively affecting my entire life. I expressed my thoughts and feelings honestly to my parents. I had my lawyer send Jane a warning letter concerning defamation. That letter probably shocked her, as her post suddenly stopped afterward. Interestingly, signs of fraying began to appear in Tony and Jane's relationship. According to a mutual friend, Tony was beginning to regret the situation and felt trapped by Jane's demands. He had to acknowledge that her actions were not entirely justifiable. Nonetheless, they did not apologize or take responsibility for their actions. I decided it was time to focus on myself. I started therapy to deal with the family issues and figure out how to maintain my mental and physical health moving forward. My therapist taught me that while I can't change others' behaviors, I can limit their influence on my life. I came to prioritize my health and financial stability. I refused to engage with Jane or Tony and rejected my parents' guilt-tripping, relying instead on the support of close relatives and friends. This allowed me to finally breathe. Months later, after cutting off relations with Tony, Jane, and my parents, the situation dramatically changed. News spread through mutual friends that Jane had broken up with Tony. Tony appeared regretful about past events. However, I made it clear to him that any attempts to rebuild our relationship would require time, effort, and respect for my boundaries. Meanwhile, my parents began to make moves to rebuild our lost relationship. They admitted their role in facilitating Tony and Jane's actions and expressed regret over the risks they had taken. This ordeal proved to be incredibly valuable for me, allowing me to regain a sense of self-control and independence, and the effort was well worth it. My cousin, who had supported me through this trial, became an even more significant figure in my life. She helped me overcome the great challenge of starting my own business and encouraged me to focus on truly important relationships. We celebrated every small success together, from acquiring our first business client to settling into a new home. Her unwavering support reminded me of the actions I took against Jane, including issuing a restraining order and defamation warning. By the time Jane's breakup with Tony became public, her presence on social media had nearly vanished, and her reputation was at its worst. Friends began distancing themselves from her, and she eventually deleted her accounts. Later, I heard she moved to another city to start a new life, carrying the scars of her past but taking new steps forward. My parents changed, and we began to gather again without the previous tension. The relatives who supported me remained robust in their support. The emotions tied to past events gradually faded, allowing me to feel at home again for the first time in a long while. Some relatives even praised me for standing my ground and overcoming the difficult situation, leading to reunions with distant family members. The feeling of being free from others' expectations was more necessary than I had ever imagined. Reflecting on the events, I realize how much I've grown through this experience. Setting firm boundaries, prioritizing my mental health, and valuing self-respect over toxic relationships have become unforgettable lessons for me. The journey to healing hasn't been easy, and various events have occurred along the way, but I feel I finally reached a place where I can move forward positively, unencumbered by the weight of the past.